Time for another installment, the first of the season of the Maritime Hot Stove. Joined now by Will MacLaren, who does color for St. John Sea Dogs, broadcasts on Rogers Television, has covered the Moncton Wildcats in the past. And also joined by David McKnight, the writer for the QNews.net for the Moncton Wildcats, also writer for HockeyProspectus.com. We can just jump right into a season preview of sorts, not just for us, but around the league. I think there's a lot of focus on the Maritime Division, in particular what's being called, I guess, the Big Three between Cape Breton, Charlottetown, and St. John. Cape Breton and St. John both nationally ranked in the CHL rankings, but you look over at Sportsnet, they have Charlottetown picked to win the division. So three strong teams. How do we see this playing out? David, we'll start with you on this one.
I think at the end of the season, you're going to see these three teams separated by a matter of 4, maybe 6, maybe 8 points. I think they're all very strong lineups when you look at them. Right now, I think Charlottetown might have the most complete lineup in the division. They have good depth up front. They have game breakers and Daniel Sprong, Philip Chlapik, Mason McDonald in goal, possibly the best goaltender in the league coming into this season. I think if there's an area they could add, it's on defense. There's not a whole lot of offense coming from the back end, so that may be an area where they look to add. I look at Cape Breton. They have some game breakers up front as well, Max Lazarev, Evgeny Svechnikov. Bit of a concern with the depth with Ranger not showing up. There may be some question marks on that second line. I think they're going to look at Anthony Sorrentino, maybe Jordan Ty Fournier to fill those roles. I really like their defense in Cape Breton. It's a veteran group. They've got guys that can produce offense like Leveille and Gosselin and Olivier LeBlanc. And they've got some guys like McIntyre and Deschamps that can fill those second and third pairing roles. Bit of a question mark. Can Alex Boulanger handle the number one role? I think he can, but we will see. St. John, I like their depth a lot, especially up front. The one thing with them up front is they don't quite have the game breakers that Cape Breton and Charlottetown have. There's no Svechnikov, there's no Sprongs, but they might have the best depth up front. Obviously, Joe Valino will be something we'll really be looking at this season. I like their defense as well. It's young, but it's very good and talented. And the question in goal, again, is can Marc-Andre Turcotte handle the number one role? So that'll be something to look forward to.
Good rundown, David. Will, what are your thoughts on those three teams in the Maritimes?
I think Dave did hit the nail on the head in terms of strengths as well as weaknesses. I guess if I was to pick one over the other, it would be a complete crapshoot. And I do agree that 6 to 8 point spread is probably a reasonable expectation. It'll probably be a fight to the finish now. I mean, obviously, a lot of things can happen between now and then. We thought last season that we'd see a bit of a race between Cape Breton and Moncton at the end of the day. That did not materialize. I guess it becomes a question of what did these three teams learn from their experiences in 2014-15 that will potentially put them over the top. You have a St. John team that was not expected to do much last year. They were absolutely lights out the first half of the season, didn't lose a game in regulation at home until January. Went on a bit of a downturn, more of the team that we expected to see actually in the second half of the season. They lost in 5 games to Baie-Comeau in the first round, but there were a couple of hard-fought games, and they were led largely by the young guys, your guys like Nathan Knoll and your Matthew Josephs and Thomas Shabbat, who improved as the season went on very, very well. He started to play with a bit more grit to his game. Of course, Cape Breton, a lot of expectations last year. They ended up far below those expectations in the regular season, but then ended up taking the eventual Memorial Cup semifinalists from Quebec to 7 games and looked very good at times in the process doing so. So it'll be interesting to see, not only in the case of Cape Breton, what experience in the lineup as well as behind the bench. Marc-Andre Dumont has probably got a little more pressure on him than the other two guys behind the benches in St. John and Danny Flynn, as well as the new man behind the bench in Charlottetown. That leaves you with the Islanders, and quite frankly, winning their first series in 11 seasons last year. A bit of an up-and-down regular season, but certainly the horses to carry them through maybe a little bit further this year. If I was to pick one of those three teams, and I hope this doesn't sound too homerish, but at the end of the day, I would probably give a slight edge to the St. John Sea Dogs. The scoring by committee, I think, is very impressive. The defense is a year older, a year stronger, and many of those guys will be coming back with NHL training camp experiences. And I think there will be enough of a team defense emphasized by Danny Flynn to make Marc-Antoine Turcotte or Alex Bishop's job a little bit easier. But just because I'm picking the Sea Dogs does not mean that it's not going to be a very tight three-horse race all the way through.
Well said, Will MacLaren. I think between the two of you, you really hit the nail on the head. You mentioned Danny Flynn. Coaching could be a big thing, and he may be the perfect complement to a bit of a young Sea Dogs defense. They don't have those big guns, as David mentioned, but they do certainly have better depth, I would say, than Cape Breton and Charlottetown. And Charlottetown, you look, they have those three prolific 30-goal scorers from last year, in Goulet, Chalapik, and Sprong. And they have a plethora of question marks, but I think they have enough guys in the mix to fill out that second line that shouldn't be a problem. But it's going to be interesting, especially with these teams all have to play each other a lot this year. Looking at the other half of the division, and this is worth noting, as Will mentioned last year, there were some surprises. So we want to take a look at the other teams and see maybe who would be best equipped to surprise and move up to the top half of the division standings. Will, we'll start with you on this one. Your thoughts on Moncton, Halifax, and Bathurst?
You get three kind of distinct teams going at it there. You've got a Halifax team that's now fully on the back end of what was a very impressive run from about 2011 to 2014. Pretty much all the big guns are now gone. There's nobody left from the 2013 Memorial Cup team. However, they still have one bona fide superstar in the case of one Timo Meier, San Jose draft pick, and I think everything will hinge on if Meier comes back, first of all, and if he does, how far can he ride this Mooseheads team into a playoff position. Obviously, 44 goals last year. He was playing alongside Nikolai Ehlers. Now he's going to be expected to carry a lot of that load on his own, along with Danny Moynihan. Although there are a few bits and pieces there, guys like Kevin Fitzgerald on the back end. In net, they have Brassard back as a 20-year-old. They have a few pieces that should keep them contentious for a playoff spot. But at the end of the day, is it going to be enough to put them in a playoff spot? And more importantly, is it going to put them into any discernible spot in the standings? If I'm the Halifax Mooseheads, I'm probably looking at it from the standpoint of you've got nothing to lose. At the worst case scenario, you finish towards the bottom of the division, and they, who also hold Quebec Ramparts' first-round pick in the 2016 entry draft, you could end up with two top five picks. I have a feeling this year the Halifax Mooseheads are probably gearing more towards what's happening in June as opposed to what's happening the rest of the regular season. The Aggie Bathurst Tetons still building, and I think it's a safe bet that everybody likes what they're seeing in Bathurst. They're really focused, committed to a building process, really for the first time in a long time. A lot of great 16, 17-year-old kids in the lineup there. Jordan Marr, of course, who came onto the scene last year. A couple of very high draft picks this year, guys like young Riley Pickard in net. I think they're going to be a contentious team from the standpoint of they'll be hard to take 2 points off of, but still probably another year or two away from contending for any sort of division crown. And then there's the Moncton Wildcats, who seem to have this philosophy of they want to stay competitive as possible every year. A few big chunks taken out of that team that finished second overall last year, Ivan Barbashev and Alex Dubois in net being the biggest ones. The question is, will the guys who've been brought in to sort of patch the holes, guys like Kevin and Kelly Klima, just to name a couple, are they going to be enough to keep them afloat in the division? They are going to have three teams ahead of them in St. John, Cape Breton, and Charlottetown that are going to be no easy feat to beat on any given night. And at the end of the day, although I understand the philosophy the Wildcats trying to take here, I can't help but wonder if maybe it wouldn't be in their best interest to sell off some of their more marketable assets at Christmas time. Your Garland, Jacob Sweeney's back as well, and just commit to a rebuild and go from the ground up and see where that leads you.
Yeah, certainly a lot of interesting things to watch for in the other half of the division. David, your thoughts on those three teams?
Yeah, it's interesting to look at Moncton right now because they've kind of gone with a bit of an older roster, not a ton of young guys. In fact, there's only 4 players on the roster that are 17 and younger, and some of those likely won't be regulars in the lineup on a nightly basis. You have to look at Connor Garland, led the league in scoring last year, was a dynamic duo with Ivan Barbashev. It'll be interesting to see what he does for an encore without Barbashev. Who is going to step up to fill those roles? Will mentioned the Klimas. There's Manuel Viederer, the new Euro in town up front. And you might look at a guy like Cameron Askew to step up and take on a bigger role this season. The big question mark is in goal. Is Zach Fortin going to be good enough to be a number one in the queue? That remains to be seen. He had a very good year last year in Junior A in Alberta. Halifax, they're going to get solid goaltending from Eric Brassard. He showed that last season. Came over from Quebec and played quite well for the Mooseheads. I also like their D moving forward. They had a very good playoff run. It's a younger defense core, bringing back most of the guys from last year. They really only lost Austin Hardy, and he's being replaced by Cody Donaghy, who came over from Quebec in the offseason as part of the Zach Fucali trade. Up front, though, they look thin. There's Timo Meier and Danny Moynihan, and after that, you're not real sure who's going to score. Is Otto Sompi going to pick up the slack? Maybe Ilya Putinsev, who was picked in the Q draft this past summer. And then you've got Bathurst, who are very young, but they have talent. They could surprise some people this season if guys like Antoine Morand and Vladimir Kuznetsov adjust to the league quickly. But I think with Bathurst, you're kind of looking at next season is when they finally take a bit of a bigger step forward.
Yeah, well said on that, David. I think if you were to look at things from a pure talent point of view, probably the T10 have the most raw talent of those three teams on a consistent basis, but they don't have that game breaker like a Meyer in Halifax or Garland in Moncton. But down the road, certainly it should pay off. You do wonder if Moncton does get some contributions from the depth guys. Maybe they could move up into the top half of the division. Probably still a bit of a long shot, though.